Your parking spot manifestations work every time. Your coffee upgrades show up like clockwork. But that career change you've been visualizing for 8 months, still nothing. That relationship you can picture in perfect detail, radio silence. You're using the exact same technique for all of them, and that's the problem. Most practitioners think bigger manifestations just need more intense visualization or longer sessions. They don't, they need a completely different type of assumption. Neville distinguished between what he called prayer, momentary assumption that works for small things, and living from the end, which is sustained consciousness required for life changing results. Here's what's actually happening: you assume the parking spot exists for 30 seconds and forget about it completely. But with your dream job, you visualize for 20 minutes at night, then spend 8 hours the next day in your current position, unconsciously reinforcing the exact self concept you're trying to change. The technique isn't failing. You're applying brief assumption to goals that require sustained assumption. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why small manifestations succeed with minimal effort while big ones collapse under the weight of your unmanaged daily consciousness. The problem isn't with your visualization skills. The problem is that you're treating all manifestations like they operate under the same rules, when Neville taught something completely different. In his work from 1952, he made a distinction most people read straight past. He separated what he called prayer from what he called living from the end. Prayer is momentary assumption. Living from the end is sustained assumption. Small manifestations succeed with prayer. Life changing manifestations require you to live from the end. Here's what that actually means. When you want a parking spot, you assume it exists for maybe 30 seconds, then completely forget about it. Your consciousness isn't invested in being a person who struggles with parking. You don't have a parking identity crisis. You assume the spot, release it, and move on. That brief assumption works because parking spots don't challenge your core sense of self. But your dream career, that requires you to become someone entirely different. Someone with different skills, different confidence, different daily habits. Someone who thinks different thoughts when they wake up in the morning. You can't assume that identity for 20 minutes at night and expect it to hold against 8 hours of your current job the next day. I've seen this exact mistake in person after person who studies Neville seriously. They'll practice states akin to sleep perfectly. They'll visualize with complete sensory detail. They'll feel the reality of their desired outcome during practice. Then they'll spend the next day unconsciously reinforcing exactly the identity they're trying to change. But before I show you the corrected technique, there's a specific moment in your daily routine where the old identity reasserts itself and dismantles hours of careful practice. It's not when you'd expect. I'll show you exactly when this happens in a few minutes. Because missing this moment is why visualization quality doesn't correlate with results. Take someone who has been practicing states akin to sleep for their ideal relationship for 6 months. Every night she lies down and assumes she's in a loving partnership. She feels her partner beside her. She hears conversations they have. She wakes up feeling certain it's real. But the moment she checks her phone in the morning and sees no messages, she slides back into single consciousness. She spends her commute wondering why she's still alone. She has lunch conversations about how hard dating is. She goes to sleep as someone in love and wakes up as someone looking for love. The assumption she built in 20 minutes gets dismantled across her entire day. She's not doing the technique wrong. She's applying momentary assumption to something that requires sustained assumption. Most teachers will tell you sustained assumption means visualizing all day or walking around affirming constantly. They're completely backwards. Neville never taught constant mental effort. He taught the exact opposite. In his later work from the 1960s, he was clear that assumption should become as natural as wearing clothes. You don't consciously maintain wearing a shirt all day. You put it on in the morning and forget about it. Forced assumption creates resistance. Natural assumption creates results. Actually, let me give you the clearer example. One day, she tries something different. Instead of just visualizing the relationship during her practice, she starts paying attention to how single consciousness operates during the day. She catches herself checking her dating apps from a place of lack. She notices how she talks about relationships with friends. She realizes her morning routine is designed around being alone. She starts changing those patterns. not forcing different thoughts, but becoming aware of the identity that runs automatically when she's not practicing. 3 weeks later, she meets someone at a coffee shop, not because the visualization finally worked, but because she stopped spending her entire day as someone desperately seeking what she already claimed to have during practice. That's the difference between prayer and living from the end. Prayer is a practice session. Living from the end is becoming the person who naturally has what you desire, even when you're not actively assuming it. Neville taught this in his lectures from 1968. He said states of consciousness are the only reality, not visualization sessions, not practice periods. States of consciousness that operate throughout your entire day. The bigger the manifestation, the more sustained the new state must become. If you want to go deeper on this, I've built a complete diagnostic that identifies exactly where your state breaks down between practice sessions. It's in the description below, completely free. Now, here's the part that separates successful practitioners from everyone else. There's a detail about how assumption actually stabilizes that Neville taught clearly, but most modern teachers leave out entirely. I'm going to show you that detail next, because without it, you'll keep applying the right technique with the wrong foundation. Most people skip past this part of Neville's teaching about intervals, but this is where the whole mechanism lives. When he said feeling is the secret, he wasn't talking about excitement or hope or positive emotions. He meant the natural sense of being that operates without conscious effort, the feeling of already being the person who has what you desire. Small manifestations work because they don't require you to change your fundamental sense of self. Big manifestations fail because they do, and nobody teaches you how to make that identity shift stick. Here's exactly what to do tonight. First, you'll pick one major desire you've been working on for months. Second, you'll catch yourself throughout tomorrow in any moment where you're unconsciously operating as someone who doesn't have it yet. Third, instead of trying to force different thoughts, you'll simply become aware of how much time you spend in the old identity outside of practice. That awareness alone changes everything. You start seeing your daily patterns clearly. Remember that example I gave about the woman checking her phone. That single morning habit was reinforcing single consciousness more powerfully than 20 minutes of visualization could override. Here's the moment I mentioned earlier. The critical window where old identity patterns reassert themselves is the first 60 seconds after you wake up, before conscious thought takes over. Your mind automatically defaults to familiar consciousness about who you are and what your life looks like. Most people never notice this happening because they immediately reach for their phone or start their routine. But this first minute sets the baseline consciousness for your entire day. The second mistake people make is expecting big manifestations to appear on the same timeline as small ones. Your parking spot shows up in minutes, your coffee upgrade happens immediately, so you expect your career change to manifest just as quickly. When it doesn't, you assume the technique failed. Neville taught about what he called the interval, the time between assumption and manifestation. In his book Seed Time and Harvest from 1956, he explained that bigger manifestations naturally have longer intervals because they involve more moving parts. A parking spot requires one car to leave. A career change might require new skills, different opportunities, shifts in multiple people's decisions, changes in your own readiness. During these intervals, assumption must be maintained despite contrary evidence. This is where most people abandon their assumption. They see no movement for weeks and conclude it's not working. The interval isn't evidence of failure, it's part of the natural process for complex manifestations. Here's a pattern I've watched repeat with student after student. Someone decides to manifest financial abundance. They practice states akin to sleep religiously. They visualize having money, feeling secure, living without financial stress. For the first month, they maintain the assumption consistently. But by month 2, when nothing obvious has changed, doubt creeps in. By month 3, they're back to checking their bank account from a place of anxiety. They treated abundance like a parking spot manifestation. Brief assumption, quick result, but financial abundance isn't just money appearing. It's becoming someone who thinks, acts, and responds differently around money. Someone who makes different choices, sees different opportunities, has different conversations. That identity shift takes time to stabilize. But then something shifted in his approach. Instead of just visualizing having money during practice, he started noticing his scarcity responses during the day, how he tensed up when bills arrived, how he talked about money with friends, how he made purchasing decisions from fear rather than choice. He realized he was spending 1 hour assuming abundance and 23 hours practicing scarcity. So he started changing the small responses, not forcing himself to feel abundant, but catching the automatic scarcity reactions and choosing different responses. When bills came, instead of immediately worrying about payment, he'd pause and respond as someone who handles finances calmly. When friends complained about money, instead of joining the conversation, he'd redirect or stay quiet. 6 weeks later, he got offered a side project that doubled his monthly income. Not because he visualized harder, but because he stopped spending his days unconsciously reinforcing the exact identity he was trying to change during practice. Before I give you the complete application protocol, there's one final piece about your baseline consciousness that determines whether any technique sticks long term. It's the piece that separates people who get results in weeks from people who practice for years without success. I'll address that now. If you've been practicing Neville's techniques for months without seeing movement on your major goals, the problem isn't your visualization skills. The problem is that you're changing circumstances without changing self concept. This is where 90% of serious practitioners get stuck, and most teachers never address it directly. You can manifest temporary results that contradict your self concept, but you can't maintain them. Wait, let me give you the foundation first. Neville taught that self concept operates as the foundation beneath all individual manifestations. In Feeling is the Secret from 1944, he explained that your sense of self determines what you can successfully maintain. You might temporarily assume circumstances that contradict your self concept, but they won't last. Here's the baseline test. Tomorrow morning, catch the very first automatic thought about yourself before you get out of bed. That thought reveals your unconscious self concept. If it contradicts what you're trying to manifest, you've found why your techniques produce temporary results that fade. Your self concept is quietly overriding your practice sessions. Someone manifests their ideal relationship but still sees themselves as unworthy of love. They'll unconsciously sabotage it or attract someone who confirms their hidden sense of unworthiness. Someone manifests financial success but still identifies as someone who struggles with money. They'll make poor decisions or encounter setbacks that restore the familiar financial stress. This is why small manifestations are easier to maintain. A parking spot doesn't challenge your sense of self. You don't have a deep identity around being someone who struggles with parking. But career success, relationship fulfillment, financial abundance, these touch core beliefs about who you are and what you deserve. The technique becomes completely different when you understand this. Instead of just visualizing having what you want, you focus on becoming someone who naturally has it, not just during practice, but in the automatic thoughts, responses, and choices that happen when you're not consciously managing your consciousness. You don't need to be advanced to do this. You don't need a teacher in the room. You need to find a gap between your practice sessions and your daily identity, and I'm going to point straight at it. Nothing here requires talent. It requires attention to the hours you have been ignoring. Watch what's really happening here. The gap lives in the hours between practice sessions. That's where assumption either compounds or evaporates. That's where your new identity either stabilizes or gets dismantled by unconscious patterns that run automatically when you're not actively assuming. When you manage those hours, everything changes. Not because you're forcing different thoughts all day, but because you're becoming aware of the identity that operates without conscious oversight. Once you see it clearly, you can choose something different. Once you choose consistently, assumption becomes natural instead of effortful. Most people focus on perfecting the 1 hour of practice. The actual transformation happens when you start paying attention to your unmanaged daily consciousness. That's where small manifestations and big manifestations split into completely different requirements. That's where the technique either works consistently or keeps disappointing you with temporary results that fade. The reason your major manifestations keep stalling isn't that you need better visualization or stronger feeling during practice. It's that you're building assumption for 1 hour and unconsciously dismantling it across your entire day. Small manifestations work because they don't challenge your daily identity. Big manifestations fail because they require sustained assumption that operates automatically when you're not consciously practicing. You've been treating sustained assumption like extended visualization, when Neville meant something completely different. He meant becoming the person who naturally has what you desire, even during the mundane hours when you're not thinking about manifestation at all. Seeing this pattern is the easy half. You can already feel which hours of your day belong to your old identity and which moments your assumption starts cracking. You can probably name the specific thoughts, conversations, and automatic responses that pull you back into the consciousness you're trying to change. That diagnosis is straightforward once someone points it out clearly. Installing a state that actually holds across all 23 hours is the work. It's the half that requires specific protocol, not just awareness. It's the difference between recognizing the gap and systematically closing it. Most teachers stop at the recognition because the diagnosis is easy to give away and a step by step protocol is not. So there's a specific next step for anyone who wants to actually bridge this gap instead of just understanding it intellectually. For anyone watching this who already knows which hours of their day are dismantling their practice, I built the source code diagnostic specifically for this gap. It walks you through one ordinary day and identifies the exact moments your assumption breaks down between practice sessions. It's completely free. Link in the description below. Tonight, pay attention to the first thought that crosses your mind when you wake up tomorrow. Before you check your phone, before you start your day, catch that automatic thought. That's your default consciousness speaking. That's what runs your unmanaged hours. In his teachings from 1968, Neville said, "You are already that which you seek to be." The gap isn't in becoming someone new. The gap is in recognizing who you already are beneath the hours of unconscious contradiction. The daily patterns decide everything. Start watching them.